Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here on Monday, New Zealand time. I no idea what time zone or day you're in if you're watching from North America or from Europe. But God bless you. Thank you for joining me in my office. And yes, I have many books. When we came from Canada to here, we were able to put everything into a shipping container, and they don't do it by weight. It's just by space. So I was able to bring all my books and all my commentaries. So I've got books here, and I got a wall of books, but a good I would say a good half of the books up on this side are from previous pastors from South City C3. So we are in a book, aren't we? Our third book in our devotional series. This is The Storm-Tossed Family by Russell Moore. Last week we were talking a lot about gender. I would say not gender issues, but just how the Bible looks at gendered roles, and how they fit within the cross-shaped family. Let me just kind of roll back the last thought that Russell Moore had on this, and then we'll just kind of continue on. It says, a cross-shaped masculinity walks not with Esau's swagger, but with Jacob's limp. A cross-shaped femininity comes not with the glamour of Potiphar's wife, but with the Bible-teaching prowess of Eunice and Lois. There are differences between men and women that are tied up with the differences between mothering and fathering. And remember, all Christians are called to at least some aspects of spiritual parenting within the church, even when we're not within the family. Adam is created from the earth, and his name signifies his origin in the dirt. Adam means, quote, earth in Hebrew. He is called to work the ground, but the curse frustrates his aspects of the mission at precisely this point. As Adam aims to cultivate the ground, it will bear thorns and thistles and produce only by the sweat of his brow. Conversely, Eve is created from the side of humanity, and she is named for the giving of life. Yet again, the curse frustrates her and her aspect of the mission by impeding the nurture of new life. Even here, in the curse, we see patterns emerge that teach us about their callings as man and woman, and mother and father. But these reflect general patterns of giftedness and calling, not zero-sum categories. Ask yourself, are men nurturing? Yes. Jesus is a man and compared himself to a mother hen gathering her chicks. Likewise, the Apostle Paul was a man and compared himself to a woman in labor and a nursing mother. Are women called to provide and to protect? Yes. One would be advised not to tangle with Jael if unprepared to take a tent peg to the side of one's head. Moreover, the Proverbs 31 mother is not presented as receiving breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, but as out making real estate deals. Poet and essayist Wendell Berry notes the difference between sexual difference and sexual division. Often, we cannot tell the two apart. He says this: a sexual difference is not a wound or need not be. A sexual division is, Berry writes. And it is important to recognize this division, this destroyed household that now stands between the sexes, is a wound that is suffered inescapably by both men and women. Barry commends an idea of husbandry and housewifery or wiffery that he argues that can hardly be understood in a post-industrial world, in which these worlds themselves hardly make sense. Barry is right that in a pre-industrial world it would be impossible to separate cultivation from nurturing in the work of a man, since his primary calling would be the husbanding of the earth or of livestock. Likewise, what Barry means by housewifery is far from a 1950s caricature of a woman isolated from the work of her husband and the rest of her family. This degenerate housewifery, to use his term, is wrapped up in consumer culture, whether in the, quote, traditional woman whose value lay in the wearing out and the using up commodities, or in the woman who pursues the same sort of soulless careerism to which men long ago submitted themselves. In a pre-industrial culture, though, housewifery was a complicated task of managing a household, more akin to a project manager than to an amateur interior decorator. I hold no illusions of returning to an agrarian economy, but we must understand what one looks like in order to see the actual differences in the household economy of the biblical world, rather than embracing or reacting against a modern model that we might see as, quote, traditional. Very few people want to return to caricatured or exaggerated ideas of, quote, roles in marriage. But the loss of a sense of order and economy has been more costly than we would like to admit. Rigid patriarchy benefits men and hurts women, and on that we can all agree. But it turns out that virtual matriarchy also turns out to benefit men and to hurt women. A Christian social worker in a large Asian city told me once recently about the hostility towards men she faces in working with women. The reason is that in her area, male unemployment is widespread. Often, she said, the women work to support their families entirely, while the men do little. The result is a kind of simmering rage among many of the women there. In many contexts, the idea of the breadwinner man replaced by the breadwinner woman results in women doing almost everything they would do in a traditional arrangement, while also bearing the burden of financial responsibility. Male unemployment is itself not a family crisis. The man who redirects his energies into finding new work is still displaying service and leadership, maybe even more than before. When male unemployment comes to be seen as a routine, though, a crisis develops. In such situations, many women not only grapple with unimaginable stress, but sometimes come to see a husband and a father to their children as just another dependent that few can afford. As she asks women in working class areas ravaged by male unemployment why they do not marry the fathers of their children, author Hannah Rosen found that many of them responded not with moral rejections of family values, but with a shrug. He would just be another mouth to feed. Men in the modern age are often not viewed as leaders or as servants, but as consumers of food and beer and video games or whatever. They are seen that way because in many ways that's what they have become. without a revelatory compass to find identity, more and more men have surrendered simply to satisfying their urges and staying out of the way, instead of flattening these aspects of vocation out. The Bible refers to them in general patterns. Do fathers generally emphasize one aspect of raising up the generation and mothers another? Yes. That's typically true even in the non-human animal creation. Does this mean a man is not masculine when he cries with his daughter? By no means. Does this mean that a little girl is not feminine if she prefers riding a dirt bike to play with dolls? Again, absolutely not. The distinctions in emphasis in the general calling of mothers and fathers in Scripture is similar to the differing gifts that God grants to the church in the New Testament. One person has the gift of evangelism and another the gift of mercy. Does this mean that those without such gifts should not share their faith or leave the hurting to die in the ditch? Not at all. The one with the gift of evangelism not only complements those with those other gifts, he also equips them to be evangelists. The one with the gift of mercy would bear the special responsibility for organizing acts of mercy, but would not do so alone, but by, in some sense, equipping the rest of the church to show mercy. Likewise, in mothers and fathers, spiritual and literal, God embeds signs of a general pattern of the need for both male and female influence. These distinctions are seen in the way the Bible, while usually addressing us generally as followers of Christ, will sometimes include special instructions or specific instructions to men or to women, to mothers or to fathers, to husbands or to wives. Often these are speaking directly to temptations more common to one sex or the other. For example, for men to avoid brawling and quarreling, 1 Timothy 2:8, or women to avoid seeing their worth in terms of costly apparel and external beauty, 1 Timothy 2:9 and 10, and 1 Peter 3:4. This is not all to say that there are not men who do not define themselves by their appearance to others. There are certainly those. Nor does it mean that there are not women who are given to physical brute violence. I once attended a funeral where the ex-wife of the deceased could not attend by court order because at the visitation the night before, she had beaten the second wife senseless right in front of the casket. The Scripture does not dismiss these realities, but addresses the general patterns of the way our calling as men or women can be twisted in one way or the other. Men are warned not only against passivity and refusal to take responsibility, 1 Corinthians 6:16, but also from some sort of hypermasculinity that leads to aggression. Women are warned not only against signifying a lack of need for the male, but also against the kind of hyperfemininity that sees a woman's worth in her sexual attractiveness to men rather than in cultivating the hidden person of the heart, which in God's sight is very precious. 1 Peter 3. In all of this, God's ultimate goal is not to make us, quote, real men and real women, so much as it is to drive us away from the self and toward one another, toward the cross. It is here that the writings of Paul for wives to, quote, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, and for men to love your wives as Christ loves the church. These are of key importance, not only in the economy of a marriage, but for the whole church to grasp the meaning of the gospel. It's interesting, I was watching a video last night. It was a happy birthday video for one of Cyprus's friends. They had moved way up north in northern BC from our old hometown. The dad's a RCMP police officer. Every 3 or 4 years, they have to move. They get just transferred all around, and they found themselves up in that community. So what the mom did was they kind of gathered all these video snippets, and one of them was our family singing happy birthday. And there was this one moment where the dad had the last 90 seconds. And the dad looked at the camera with such an intense gaze. And he spoke not just a happy birthday greeting to his son. His son was turning 13. But he mentioned a couple things. The first thing was he recognized that this was a changing of oneself, a rite of passage. Our North American or European, or maybe even this culture too, is I think we are missing some of these rites of passage. And I don't know what they are for you. For different cultures, there definitely are some rites of passage. But I'm just saying, like, in my context, I grew up in a kind of English home, Canadian. We don't really have like a cultural rite of passage to say that a young girl becomes a woman, for a boy to become a man. This isn't like ancient Sparta where the boys were sent out into the wilderness, to fight and to fight a wolf, and whoever wins, and that's not what I'm saying. But I'm wondering, what is it for us? This is kind of a side venture. Culturally, some would say that you take your son out for a hunt, but then roles have changed so much in this post-industrial almost time of modernity where, why can't the woman be the hunter as well? I mentioned before, the camp that we were at, the women's retreat had introductory to chainsaw. Like, there was such a pull for that. So I think roles have changed. But going back to rites of passage, with Mexican girls, they have a quinceanera, which is there's a moment where, at 13, 14 age, they have a party, and it's when the girl becomes a woman that she's seen that way. For a boy, it's their bar mitzvah. At 13 years old, they have a huge party, and the boy comes down to the front, and he reads the Torah himself, and he's been practicing for weeks or months, and there's a big party where this is where he becomes a boy from a man. I think for me, I saw this dad on the video, and he spoke into his son's life. And he started to cry. Talk about roles. This man he's a police officer, decorated, like this guy, he's not new to the force. And he's a leader in his police detachment. And there's this moment where I'm connecting with the dad because he's speaking blessing as being the priest of the home, as the leader of the home. Not like in the context of what we were just reading, where these dads were allowed, kind of perpetually unemployed, and we've seen our fair share of that in India and Nepal and other Asian contexts where the women do just a ton of the work, and we'd watch the men just sitting and drinking and getting high or whatever it was, and it was just almost a cultural norm. And so this dad is speaking blessing over his son for his birthday. But there was a moment where, and this is just around the time where an RCMP officer had just been killed in the line of duty in Nova Scotia. So I know the context at how he's speaking. And maybe this was like the last kind of a memorial, like if anything was to happen to him, he'll always have this video. So he starts to share and give this blessing over his son, telling him, now you're becoming a man. That, this, and then he blesses his passions. He says to him, he goes, I'm so happy and so excited and I want you to follow your passions, which for this boy it was for music and art and almost a non-typical male thing to do. Like, the roles have changed so much. Men for so many generations just went into the family business. They didn't really have the freedom to go in and follow their passions, and they were almost mocked or shut out because they would be leaving the family business to pursue something, quote, frivolous. But here's his dad saying, I have no illusions that you're going to become a police officer like me. I want you to just follow your dreams, follow your passions. There's a moment where so much of that, I saw this father be the lead of his home, the priest of his home. Not to say that it was up or down, and we just finished that key component where, submit to your husbands, but also, for the men, it's like to love your wives as Christ loves the church. That's a tall order. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I wonder for us this morning, what was it for you? What was there a moment where your father spoke that kind of blessing over you, or your mother pulled you aside and not just gave you the talk, but there was a moment where they started to see you more as a young adult? You moved from a child to a young adult. And was there a rite of passage? And where do you fit in with the context of roles, with husbandry and housewifery? What do the roles look like for us, especially here in New Zealand? Anyways, I'm now taking up your precious time. God bless you. Have a great day. We're praying for you. I hope you enjoyed a really great services yesterday. The evening service was just amazing. Great worship. And we've got some planning to do. We'll see what Jacinda Ardern says today, but we'll keep you in the loop. God bless you, and we will talk to you soon. Bye for now.